Three, two, one, and we're back. Okay, welcome to the SBH podcast. In this episode, we are going to be going over fishing logs. And the reason we're going to be going over fishing logs is I get many questions about fishing logs and why I use them and why they're useful and why somebody should be using them or how to use them. And this is something that is, it's kind of like corny because I feel like everybody says this, but it is true. You need to have a fishing log in order to really progress your fishing, not only with numbers of fish, but just sheer, like, you get much larger fish once you start recording down things. Because then, as I've talked about in past podcasts, it's like a formula. There's a formula to it that if you have enough of the right ingredients, you're going to end up catching a bigger fish. So, I guess I want to talk a little bit about why, like, what I do and how I, keep my fishing log. Now, I am horrible at it. Sorry, I'm just going to move my chair over a little bit here. I'm not very good at utilizing my fishing log because I have such a hard time staying motivated to keep writing down everything every single time I fish, regardless if I catch big fish or not. And last year, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't do a good job of being honest in my fishing log as far as just writing down every single day I fished. There were days where I caught a bunch of schoolies and I was just like, why am I going to write this down? When in reality, that's super important. Why did you catch a bunch of schoolies that day? And then what can you do differently to hopefully not catch as many schoolies or catch even more schoolies or just catch bigger fish? And that is something that hopefully I can kind of talk in depth about here. And I've done I've done a fair amount of research about this. I try to do the bare minimum amount of writing I can, and the bare minimum amount of like different ingredients that I have to keep in mind. Because if you think about it, when you're going out fishing, you should be thinking about every single ingredient that's going on that day. So if I wake up and I'm like, I'm fishing today, and I'm like, okay, so where am I gonna fish? The wind is out of the north, so that means I'm gonna go where the wind is blowing straight on shore. I'm going to go and I'm going to position myself on this structure because the wind is going to create waves, and because if the wind is and the weather as well, if it's super sunny out, you're like, okay, I'm not going to want to fish during the day, and then I want to fish at night. So there's a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind. And then you go water clarity, and that's something that there's a lot of different subtopics, I'd say. Now, what I have in my fishing log is really, I focus mostly on the moon and the wind. Those are the two biggest factors for me. I know that if I can have an onshore wind and I can have a moon phase that is a new or a full moon, that I'm going to have a better shot at catching a bigger fish. And that's what I've always done. I really, honestly, if I could just pick two things to have, is those two things. And I've done a thing about fishing logs before, but I'm going to redo it because I get so many questions about fishing logs. And maybe, because I don't really remember what I said, maybe I'm going to say some different stuff. So hopefully this will work. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this. So anyway, my thing that I really focus on is the wind. I like wind. Now, I've had tons of people tell me, why do you focus so much on wind? You don't necessarily need to be focusing this much on wind. And honestly, I think it just is the fact that of where I fish and the structure that I fish. And then I have a lot of people asking questions about why do you log a skunked trip? And then I always tell them, and I'm like, yeah, I would log a skunked trip because that means you did something wrong. You should never get skunked when you're fishing. I think I got skunked 3 times last year in total and I fished, I think I fished between 6 to 7 times a week. So I pretty much took one day off a week, maybe fishing. I fished the rest of those days. And so I logged a good fair amount of days fishing. And then the days that I don't really count, I guess you could count them as skunk trips, as if I get out there, I either have gear failure or I'm getting eaten alive by bugs and I don't have bug spray or something. I forgot something, so I just packed it up and left before I really had a shot to fish. what I qualify as getting a skunk trip is me fishing like 2-3 hours and not catching anything, which rarely happens. As I said, I think it maybe happened 2 to 3 times last year, and it was probably because of the conditions being drastically different than I thought they would be when I was going out there, which is more like shame on me for not fishing or not like really paying attention to what the weather's going to do. And so, but I also was a wimp and I didn't get out of my comfort zone. I only fished in my comfort zone. I didn't explore. I didn't, because that's the other time. If you're going to get like, if you're going to lose, or I guess if you're going to get skunked, it's because you're trying something new. And you can't go out there every single day and try something new and expect great things right off the start. Like I'm gonna go really hard at trying to learn how to fish a sandy beach really well, how to fish an estuary really well, and be as confident fishing off of a sandy beach and estuary as I am fishing off the rocks. That's one of my main goals for this season. And so if I did that, 100%, I would have had many days where I got skunked because I don't know how to fish those conditions in broad daylight. Although the times that I did go and I did fish in estuaries, I actually did pretty well last year. I fished twice, and both of those times I was fishing small topwater plugs, and both those times I caught maybe 2 to 3 schoolies, about 25 inches, which is like a decent fish. I mean, I remember two years ago, I'd be thinking a 25-inch bass is a quality outing. If you can get 2 fish that are 25 inches, that's awesome. So I think that like getting a bass in the mid 20 inches is a success, especially if you're in a new spot. Getting any fish in a new place, especially action or more consistent action, can be super awesome. So as far as just because it's super fulfilling to know that your practice and what you tried to apply today actually worked successfully. And sometimes that's not the case. So, for instance, when I'm going to go fish in an estuary, I might have a viewpoint where I want to fish topwater plugs like I do. And that might not be the best way to catch a big fish. Maybe I should be bouncing the bottom with a bucktail or a soft plastic. That might be a better way to catch a bigger fish in an estuary. I know that's a way that a lot of people love fishing estuaries. Personally, it's my least favorite way to fish. My least favorite way to fish is bottom bouncing estuaries for sure. Like my least favorite way to fish. So that's pretty, so that's just my mind as far as like I didn't really fully try as hard as I could. Now, when we're talking about fishing off of a sandy beach, I feel like I 90% of the time won't get skunked just because I feel like you can just fish the little indents in the beach, and there's always schoolies stacked up in these little indents, no matter if you're fishing the wrong tide, wrong wind. Like, I feel like there's always bass in those little places. And the thing is, in the spring, that's a great place to fish because you can get consistent action all day. But for me, I want to get 30-pound bass, and that might sound like a far stretch and a big goal, because it is. Like, if I'm not catching giant fish, I'm not really happy with what I'm doing, because that's where I'm at in fishing. I want to catch big fish. I've caught a lot of schoolies. I've caught plenty of schoolies in my life. In my fishing, and I've just gotten not bored of it, and I would kill to catch one schoolie bass right now. I'd kill, because I haven't caught a fish yet this season. I guess it just depends on how many fish you catch. Yeah, and I'm talking really fast because I'm drinking coffee in the afternoon before this podcast because I was about to fall asleep before I did this. So that is also helping me talk extremely fast right now. So that's why I'm like talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So I'll try to slow down a little bit. Anyway, so what I really want to try to do is learn how to fish in like off a sandy beach. Now, I know for me that when I'm going to go fish off a sandy beach, probably the most prominent structure that is like there will be a fish here regardless, and the structure that will actually hold a big fish and most longer sandy beaches have are rips. And that's where I guess it can be kind of two parts. Like there's multiple things to it. You can have water, you can have sandy point, so like sandy point, which is kind of like just it's like a long stretch of a long stretch of sand that is a high point. It goes from maybe 3 feet on either side to maybe 2 feet on the top. And if you walk out on that, or you cast up onto that, you can float your bait from one side of the current to the other. And depending on most of the time, the bass will be on the back side of a rip. And sheltering behind the sandbar. So if you think about it, you have current going over this rip here, you have current going over the rip, but the bass are sitting right behind the rip in the shelter of that little sand hump, and they are waiting for that bait to get pushed over it. And that's a great way to catch big fish, is when you're fishing off the side of the back side of a rip. But sometimes, especially bigger fish, will actually sit in front of the rip. So that's why when I'm fishing in a rip, I try to cast pretty far up the rip, because those bigger fish will sometimes sit there, and because they're bigger and stronger, they can sit in that current and wait. Now, because they know that there's that rip behind them, so it kind of like pins the bait. So if they do see bait and it gets by them, they can pin it to the rip. And so that's this is my basic knowledge of fishing off of sandy beaches. I don't do it that often at all. And so what I want to do is do it to a point that I'm so confident that I know I can catch the biggest fish on the beach. And a huge way of doing that is using your fishing logs. So I just want to get into it. What's in my fishing log? I have tide, I have moon phase, weather, wind, waves, plugs, and then time of day. And those are all interchangeable as far as where I have them set up. I just typed them down into my notes. What I do is I match like my tide, the waves, moon phase, and put them in different sections almost. But then you go to something like plugs. What plugs are you throwing? And then you have structure as well as another thing. But I have that in my notes below it. I do what I guess is a fishing log or a fishing journal. So I do a little entry to what I'm doing that day. So say I went there, I say the wind was blowing onshore, so the water's a little bit dirty. There's some seaweed in the water. The clarity of the water was not that great because it was blowing onshore for a couple of days, but we're in the rocks, so it's still going to be cleaner than off of a sandy beach. So the water was pretty clean other than the seaweed. I had 6 fish that day. I was fishing at 7 to 10:30 that night. I had 6 fish between 30 and 40 inches. That would be a great night of fishing. Not a great night, but it would be a good night of fishing if you got 6 fish over 30 inches. That would be quality. And then I would try to tell the size and the weight of the fish. So if I had a fish, if I caught a 33-inch bass, and that 33-inch bass would be probably, I don't know, maybe 12, and if it was fat, maybe 15 pounds. And then I had a 35-inch bass, and that would be 15 to maybe 18 pounds, 19 pounds. And then I had a 40-inch bass. Let's just say and the 40-inch bass, a 40-inch bass is about 20 pounds, maybe a little under, maybe a little over. So that would be my gauge of size. And then I could and then if you really wanted to, you could graph out, and this is later, if I was trying to really look over and study my fishing log in the off season, because really what you want to do is you want to log all of this up, and if you have time, then you want to be reading through your data, and then you kind of want to graph it out. You want to be okay, I was fishing at this time of day. What did I catch during this time of day? And then you could graph sizes and lengths and weights of the fish and see the curve. What is the best time of the day to actually end up fishing in that spot? Is it in the early morning, or is it in the middle of the day or at night? So that's something that you should be doing in the winter when you're doing your logs. And this is a lot of work. I'm not trying to sound like this is not a lot of work. This is a lot of work, and this is why I'm so bad at keeping up with my log and really studying it and really writing it more coherently. So what I'm going to do next year is I'm going to write it next season. This coming season, I'm going to be writing it in a more coherent way. Having read a lot of stuff online about fishing logs and other people's logs and read other log books and talked to other fishermen and what they do, um, I kind of have a better thought of what I'm going to do. I mean, I was kind of doing the right stuff, but I want to be able to make it an easy way that I can write it down. I've also written stuff down on this is my secret notepad, and good thing none of you will be able to read my handwriting, but I'll just make sure we yeah, I mean, you won't be able to see exactly where I was here probably, but like what I try to do is I also write in cursive, so you guys are definitely not gonna be able to read this. And so I have like the time that I fished. So I fished from 3:30 p.m. to 6:15 p.m. It was mid tide on incoming. The wind was 3 miles per hour. The waves were 2 to 3 feet. It was the moon phase. It was a waxing crescent. Um, you know, I fished set out the rocks on tide rocks beach. The big fish. I'm trying to see what I can say without. I was fishing a spook, and I got 5 fish on the spook. All of various sizes, and then I also fished a location. It was in a back bay, and it was early in the spring. That's like one of my favorite places to fish are like back bays in the springtime with like big topwater spooks, because what happens is you get, and this is like early, I'm talking about the first 2 weeks that the bass show up in your location. If you want to get like the biggest bass out of that area, like in the first 2 weeks, one, you can use small eels. That's like the best way to do it, and you can probably catch bass into the low 30s. Number 2, what you can do is you can throw large topwater spooks and stuff in back bays, and sometimes you'll find these little pods of bass, and they can be in that high 20-inch range, and it's a lot of fun, especially when you have lighter tackle. I like to throw my lighter setups and just have a lot of fun. I'm gonna do more fly fishing this spring because I just want to do more fly fishing than I did last year. I was really focusing on getting size. I'd love to get a bigger fish on the fly rod. If I get something that's like 20 pounds on my fly rod, I'd be ecstatic. So that's kind of another goal I have. But yeah, so I'm gonna try to what I tried to do in like the spring is I look through my logbook here, and I can see that I fished this back bay area in last spring. I fished it 6 times probably. I actually didn't fish it after that the whole year. And I fished that spot 6 times, and I had bass up to 30 inches there. And that was between May 4th and I'm gonna say maybe May 15th, 16th. That's when I started like trying to turn into catching bigger fish. And then when it got to late May, that was when there was 40 pound bass around, and we started to really hammer some big fish. Especially, and I had one spot that worked so well in the spring, then it just died. But I had this just such killer season there early, and I was like, no, my spot. I was so pissed. I was so pissed because that spot was producing so well for me, and then it just slowed down. And that was frustrating because then I had to find another spot that would produce, and that's also not that easy to do, is to find multiple spots of where there are big fish. But what helps is if you can find certain structure, and then you can write it down in your log, and then when you look back at your log and you're like, okay, this structure where I have a rock, like rocks that are very high up in the water, waves crashing over those rocks with white water coming in, I know that swirling white water underneath there's going to be some fish set up. So I know, okay, look for big boulders and stuff that are shallow to deep. And I did a lot of that, like shallow to deep, wave sweep where waves are crashing on one side of a big group of boulders and pushing a lot of water in. That's something that I really love because that creates a lot of current, and it creates a hole, and it also creates just multiple ambush points where the bait is going to get funneled in. And the bass there, oh my gosh, the bass can just get giant, get huge. and then you can throw, and then it gets really fun once you like do a lot of work. I guess the more work you put in to understand where the bass are, what the bass are feeding on, like all the different conditions that you can figure out with the logs, like what time of day works best, what moon phase works best, what tide works best. That's the other thing I have that's pretty important is tide. I personally like, for catching big fish, I like slack high or slack low. And slack tide, when it's not like, when you look at like slack tide and you have like the moon phase and it goes up and then down on this curve, slack, there's 2 points of slack. It's when the current is moving at its least, like not very fast. It's when the current slows down, not when it stops. So if you want to really fish slack, you want to fish like that hour to 2 hours before high tide, or hour to 2 hours after high tide. Same thing with low tide, hour to hour and a half, hour to 2 hours before low tide, hour to an hour to 2 hours. Wow, I can't speak. An hour to 2 hours at low tide. And that's like slack, and that's when I think the biggest fish are moving around. I also think that when you have like day to night and night to day switches, which is much more prominent and happens a lot quicker, in my opinion, at the in the evening than in the morning. But when you have those actual big day-to-day switches, then that's a bite. That switch from it being dark to light or light to dark, that's when I think big fish feed. So if you can coincide a moon phase with sunset, and like high tide, then you have perfect storm to catch a really large fish. That in early too, you don't have to lose sleep either. If you can fish a place that at high tide, around a moon phase, or at like slack high tide around a moon phase in a spot that has good wind and everything, then you've hit a grand slam. And I have so many times where I've brought people out and they've had killer days, caught the biggest fish of their lives. And that's another thing. I mean, these t-shirts, I'm like, if you guys buy these t-shirts, this is the last day. I'm putting this out on Wednesday. This Wednesday is the last day you can buy these t-shirts. They're in the link in my Instagram at Stripe Bass Hunt. And if you purchase one of these t-shirts, you tag me on Instagram in a post, you're entered into a raffle to win a free fishing trip with me, and have a decent. And I would suggest picking, and you can pick any day of your choice during the fishing season, but it will be on Cape Ann, and I would suggest picking it around either a new or a full moon. And also, like, we can keep it up in the air too. I can tell you, like, if I can see 10-day forecast and I can see what direction the wind's blowing in, I can tell you where what winds I like the best, and what time would be the best for us to meet. There's all sorts of things I gotta figure out, but that's for next season, like next year, because number one, we have this crazy coronavirus, so I hope everybody's staying safe, and this is no joke, this is real. So everybody just social distance, go fish by yourself. Yeah, so if you can do that, that would be great. Because the more people social distance, the better, the quicker this will be over. Anyway, so if we can fish if we can fish a good moon phase, we'll be able to get onto some big fish. As well as what I was saying is it's going to be next year, because we do have the coronavirus, and also I'm probably going to start guiding next year. I've talked a little bit about that. I have it kind of up in the air about what I'm going to do next year. But yeah, next year I'm contemplating guiding a little bit. So if you guys are excited about that, you can comment on my in the YouTube if you want, if you think that's a good idea, and if you guys want to come out with me at some point, because maybe in 2021, wow, that's crazy, you guys can come fish with me. But yeah, I'm super excited about this next season. I've talked a lot about, like, I guess I'm not really getting that deep into the fishing log stuff, but like I'll get a little bit more deep into it. I'm super excited about this next season. It's so close. I have I'm probably gonna catch my first fish. This is coming out Wednesday, as in this Wednesday. And what is it, the 15th, 16th? Man, I'm blind. My contacts are dry. It's the 15th. I think. Wow, I have to check this to make sure this is right. Yeah, it's the 15th. So Anyway, I'm gonna be this is gonna be posted on the 15th, and the 22nd is a new moon, and that's when the bass should be in Cape Ann, in my opinion. I don't care what anybody else says. I've heard people talking about how, oh, I caught my first bass March 3rd on the Cape. I'm like, I caught my first bass much further north than you in or March, May, sorry, May 4th or May 3rd on the Cape. I was like, I caught my bass way further north than you in May as well, May 4th or whatever. And so, like, I know, like, and not only did I catch that fish, I had consistent action of like strong feeding schools of bass from then on out. So I know for a fact that the bass are going to be a week earlier because they are showing up everywhere a week to even more earlier. So if so, we know that the bass are a week to or more earlier. So if that's the case, they're going to be showing up the week of the 22nd, which I think is a Monday. Correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe a Wednesday. It's either a Monday or Wednesday, I think. The 22nd. I'm not going to figure this out now because I can't. So that's when I think the bass are going to be here. So I'm going to go to the Cape, and the reason I'm going to the Cape is because, number one, I can drive there with one tank of gas, get out of my car, fish, get in my car, and drive home all on one tank of gas, and not putting anybody else in danger of getting the coronavirus or me getting it or whatever. So that will be. So I'm still social distancing. I'm gonna fish a spot down there, and I know has a herring run or alewife or whatever. And so I know the alewife come in there, they come out, they stage up in these rocks right at the mouth of the estuary. And I know that if the bass are going to be there early, they're like, if the bass are going to be anywhere, they're going to be there early because it's going to be in like later in the or later. Wow, it's going to be kind of where like it'll be like if the fish are coming into or onto the Cape, it's going to be one of the first areas that they'll show up on. And that's your hint. You can look in an estuary where there are rocks at the mouth of it, and it is where the bass will start showing up there first. That is an alewife run. If you guys can figure that out. Because I don't necessarily. I looked on Google Earth. I saw it. I looked up about that area. Yeah, because that's what I do. So if you really want to find a good, solid spring area to fish, what you can do is you can go on Google Earth, you look at estuaries that go up and into, there's like our yard work going around for some reason. I don't even know if it's like whatever, it's super loud. Anyway, if you can hear that, I apologize. But there's a area, if you can look at like estuaries that go up into smaller like lakes, like smaller ponds or lakes and stuff, then there's a good chance there's going to be alewife pushing through there. And most of the time, if there are, you can look up that river system, and number one, 90% of them have alewife in their name, and then the others are you can look up and there'll be something about alewife or something about the whatever. It'll have alewife. You can look up the system. So that's what I would do. Find where there's bait that is going to be early. We all know that the alewife show up just before the bass do, and that if you can find where the alewife are coming through, you can find where the bass are. There's a spot local to me that I have put on my story where I keep going and looking for the alewife, and I know there's alewife going through because there's somebody, I don't even know who, but it's all electronic, so there's a big I don't know how it counts it, but it counts the alewife electronically, and then somebody comes by and puts on a whiteboard the amount of alewife that have come through that spot in the day or the past day. So I was there like 3 days earlier, and it was like 150 alewife came through, and then I was there yesterday, and it was like 225 alewife. So the alewife are starting in Cape Ann, are starting to get going now, which gives me faith that we're going to be getting bass fairly soon, because once you really start seeing a lot of alewife, that's when I feel much more confident that we could be getting into some good like we could be getting some bass in. The other thing that I think of is holdover fishing. Sometimes there are fish that are that's overwinter in the rivers, and what they do is they push the alewife, or when the alewife are running, they go and they push the alewife up near the bank, and they sit and wait. And sometimes you can have a lot of fun with a little light spinning rod or a fly rod, and you can get some decent sized bass. You can get bass up to like 25 pounds or more, almost 30 pounds. Probably you could get a 30 pounder, I don't know, in those bigger, I mean, obviously in the huge rivers, there are people that get bass that are 30 pounds that are holdovers, but that's like crazy if you can do that. I would love to get even some schoolies that are holdovers. So, and I don't really try to hold over fish that much, but I try to go for big fish if I feel like I have a shot at doing it. So it's going to be high tide tonight. So I'm going to be in a spot where I know that the alewife are going to could in theory get pushed to the sides, and I feel like that there should be some holdovers in that spot. So we cross our fingers that because we're getting closer to a new moon and the alewife are starting to pick up in the amount that are going through, and we're at a high tide, I feel pretty confident that I could get into some holdovers, which would be very awesome. I'd be kind of shocked if I did, because I've really I don't know. I don't even know if they're there. The holdovers are there. I don't even know how many alewife are moving. I'm just hoping that at sunset, as I'm talking about a bite, I'm talking about bait move as well, right at sunset. So I'm thinking maybe if I go there at sunset, the bait are going to be moving. And so when I'm talking, I'm going to go a little bit back to my fishing log, because this is really what this podcast is about. The thing about the fishing logs and fishing is you want to be able to, your brain can't hold all the knowledge, even though I can kind of think about in my mind, I don't have to go check my log to know where I'm going to be fishing at night a lot of the time, because I have spots in mind that I'm like, this is wind is blowing from the south. I want to be here because the wind is blowing from the south, and I know this spot is good when the wind's blowing from the south. And that really determines a lot of where I fish, is where the wind is blowing. The secondary thing is what tide is it when the sun is setting, because I like to fish right at sunset. All of my biggest fish came right at sunset. I think that switch from sunset to sunrise, or that switch from sunset or sunrise, that switch from it being dark to light or light to dark is a huge time that the bass are feeding, or it can shut them off. So when I'm looking at my log, that's what I want to look at. Now in the winter time, it's a great thing to do is just read back through your log, and because spring's coming. So what you want to do is you want to start at spring. I say I'll start later in the season. I'll start at springtime and I'll start reading through that. And I'll read where I fished, what conditions worked. And then what I'll start doing is plugging in the times of day and the tides of different areas and seeing, okay, I'll plug in an area on a graph, and then I'll plug in the time of day, and then I'll plug in the tide, and I'll get everything graphed out to the point that I know at what time of day the bass are feeding the heaviest there, at what tide the bass are feeding the heaviest there, and what time of year the bass are feeding the heaviest there. And then I know, okay, fish that spot now. And then like clockwork, you have specific conditions. You go to your graph that you did that winter, then you can figure exactly where it is. Now, I can't do that, or I guess I can do that, but I don't have years and years and years and years of this. Some people have 30 years worth of log. If they did that for 30 years and they fished in one area for 30 years and they took all of that data, they wrote it all down, and then they used that data to then graph out exactly where the fish would be, you could have any conditions, and you could make a calculator like you could make on Excel. You could make a calculator so that you can plug in the conditions into certain boxes, and it will give you the best place to fish that time depending on all the variables. So you wouldn't have to work any of that out in your head. You could just go to that spot. It would tell you where to fish, what lures to throw, everything. It would just calculate that for you. So much easier than you having to do this, work it out all in your head. And if you had 30 years of that, I don't think there's a big fish that you couldn't catch. There's no excuse if you have 30 years of fishing, or even 10 years. If you have 5 to 10 years of fishing log, there's no excuse that you shouldn't be able to plug that into your calculator, your fishing calculator, And if you are fortunate enough to catch bigger fish, and you have in the past, you plug that into your calculator, or you plug certain conditions where the fishing is best into your calculator, and you should be able to, one, catch a big fish, two, catch multiple big fish. And that's the thing, like if you could do that, oh man, like that's set. So that's my goal, is to be able to, in 5 to 10 years from now, be able to have a fishing log that is extremely well detailed, and then I can plug in every single winter, plug it into this graph, plug these different places into these different graphs, so I know exactly what plugs I was throwing, exactly what tide I was fishing there, exactly what wind works best, like everything for every single spot on Cape Ann that I fish, which could be I could have 20 different places that I fish, whether that be, 5 sandy beaches, 5 estuaries, 5 rocks, or more. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what you could do. 5 places that, and I probably have 20 different places that are off the rocks of structure alone that I think look good, and then I will fish this coming season. 20 different places. Now, will I eliminate that? Because that's something that I do in the winters. I look through all of the different places that I think look good, and then I go fish every single one of them, and then I slowly start eliminating the ones that are not producing. And then what I do is I take those spots, and then I work each spot extremely hard. And even the spots that I cull out, they might still have fish. It's just that I'm not going to focus on them this year. I have like tons of years to come that I can focus on those spots if I want to revisit them. So then I start focusing on each spot, focusing in on each spot. And, the thing is, it's much easier. It's much, much, much easier to have one thing going on than have 30 things going on, and 30 things that you have to like keep in mind and test and everything. So if you really want to get one spot figured out, you have to fish it for almost a whole season. And if not, at least every single tide, every single moon phase, every single wind direction, you need to fish a spot from. Now, I can tell you that you're going to have better luck, especially if it's off the rocks, with a wind moving directly in. Now, on a sandy beach, what you really want is wind blowing with the current. That enhances the speed of the current. That is super key. That creates more current, and that helps a lot. So this is something, there's a lot of, this is a more technical podcast, because this is a very technical thing. If you really want to catch big fish, you gotta like really work hard at it. And people ask me like, you're so young, how do you catch big fish? And that's because I try my hardest at everything that I do. And that, like, people hate, like people, the thing is, like, it's really hard to do that. You gotta, to be able to, and that's just how I am. Like, I try extremely hard at whatever I'm doing, no matter that be sports, school, or fishing. I try as hard as I can to be as best I can at that thing, and that means hours and hours and hours spent. I guess it would be less for school and more for more things that are fun. It's a lot easier to do that. But even for something that I dislike doing, like fishing logs or like school, I still have to, like, you still have to try hard to do it. Like, I still try really hard at school. I still have to, in order to be good at fishing, you have to do something that's really boring, which is like making sure every single time you get back from fishing that you write down in your fishing log, no matter if it's 1 a.m, you get home fishing 1, 2 a.m, you haven't slept all night, you have to get on your computer and you have to write down your fishing log. And the reason I say get on your computer is because then you can search dates, so you can do it kind of chronological, because you can now search dates up very much easier. And then in the winter, you can just put the whole thing in a graph and graph it out. And it's much easier said than done. There's more technical parts about that. I don't know that much about Excel, but I know that you can do stuff like that on Excel, and I need to dig deeper into that. I have this in my mind. Actually, I've never talked to anybody that does this as far as like creates a calculator through Excel, but now I've heard people doing it with other things, with baking recipes. You can have a baking recipe, and for the amount of different people, for the amount of if you want to double or triple the batch, you can have all of the ingredients doubled and tripled for you by just plugging in the number of food you want to make. So it's kind of like that, because at the same time it is baking. It's the same thing. It's ingredients. It's basic. It's the same basic thought process and mindset behind it. You have multiple ingredients to get your food good, and to be able to have good food, you have to have you got to make sure everything's perfect. It's hard to have everything be perfect in fishing, but because there's 100,000 times more, variables that have everything to do from water temp, barometric pressure, air temperature, and then time of year, how aggressive the fish are feeding, like everything really. Everything really has its own its own thing that makes it difficult to do. And I hope that that makes sense to some. I hope this makes sense to those of you that are watching or watching and listening, because this is a podcast. Because this is something that's super technical, and I didn't go that deep into it, and I didn't have this idea. Now that I have it on tape, my idea is hopefully gonna actually come to fruition, I guess. I don't know, but I feel like, you know what I do there? I throw words out that I feel like sound good, and sometimes they just have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And that was one of those scenarios where I just threw a word out there and hope that it meant what I was hoping it to mean. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is there's ways to make your life extremely easy by making it more difficult. And that is, you're going to have to work super hard, to write down your log in a way that you can take all the ingredients from that log, plug it into an IXL, get everything in IXL. Wow, that's a thing that you use for math. An Excel or a spreadsheet, and you can plug it into something like that. You can then push through that, and you can get that all calculated out to where you should be fishing or what conditions are best. So that's very it's, I guess, it's going to be something that's hard for a lot of people to do. It's not easy to do, but if you really want to be if you want to be the best fisherman you can be in your location, that's a way that you might not naturally be able to be the best fisherman just because you don't have the ability to read water super well. I mean, I feel like I'm not naturally a good fisherman. I feel like I'm naturally good at catching things, but I feel like I'm not naturally good at reading conditions. It takes me a lot to read a spot. I fish a spot almost all season before I 100% know it. And the thing is, a lot of my spots are so finicky that an average person coming in there wouldn't be able to would catch nothing. But then if you spend a lot of time, you focus in, there's certain boulders, and there's certain currents, and there's certain tides where there's a current just hitting a boulder, and when it's hitting that one boulder, when the boulder's it's in this one spot where the current is coming and it's breaking the current, and it's a 25-minute period where that is the spot to be. The bass, you can catch 20, 30, 40-pound bass there for 25 minutes in every single cast, and that's one spot that I have. But the conditions have to be perfect, and that's the thing. I wouldn't know that unless I logged it, because I didn't see that until I read my log. I fished it once. I fished that thing once, and I had a success, crazy success. And then what I did is I got that I took that information when I got home and plugged it all into my fishing log, and then I fished it different, and then I tried to fish it the next day, but at a slightly different tide. Didn't work. So then I looked back at my log. I was like, why is that not working? Not that I didn't catch anything, because I caught a few schoolies, not same tide, but same time of day. And I was like, okay, I need this tide. And I was like, why is that spot not working? Why is that not working? Because I fished all through a bunch of different things, but I didn't fish that same tide. And then I was like, I wonder if there's current coming through this spot, because I knew a little bit further to the left of it, there's another boulder that the current when you wade out to it, you can feel the current. I mean, it's pretty strong. I should take a video, because there's one spot that I wade out to, and this is total tidal sweep. It's where a wave breaks, washes through, and then another wave breaks and washes through, and it has this tidal sweep. You stand there, it's strong current. It's really strong current, but it's wave current. It's really interesting, and that's what I fish so much, and that's what I love fishing, is this wave current. It's very, it's a very unique type of fishing, but it's a way that I know a lot of people fish, and a lot of people have a lot of luck doing. It's the way I fish, and the way I know I can catch a big fish. And that's why I'm going to fish a lot of that this season. But what I want to do is I want to get comfortable fishing other places. Now, I know that I can fish there, and I can catch fish. Now, what it's going to be for me is giving up good moon phases to try other spots. Now, not necessarily do I have to do that. I might just have to fish that spot when I know the tide is good in certain places off of the rocks that I know will produce, and then I need to take myself away from there and go somewhere else and try to fish there and see if I can fish there at different tides. As long as I can get my fix of maybe catching a 30, 40 pounder during the perfect golden conditions that only happen maybe once or twice a year. Because here's the thing, golden conditions could be the same golden conditions somewhere else. So you need to kind of have everything like varied. Because what happens if you go to a spot and it's either loaded with people or something's going, like you can't get there and you're like, darn, I can't get there. What do? I have another place that's completely different condition. Like it's a sandy beach versus a rocky versus off the rocks. I know that spot will produce. So I go there and I fish there. Or the waves are too big somewhere and you can't get out to your rock because the waves are too big. You're like, I can go to my sandy beach spot. It's good on those conditions, but I'm not worried about getting washed away, killed because I'm doing something reckless. So there you go. That you have that like picture of where if you can hopefully figure out golden conditions is what I'm calling them, and you can apply them to different areas, maybe you'll get, fish anywhere you want, whenever you want. All it is time. It is all time, and it's all really difficult to handle because it's going to take forever to do. It's going to take a long time. Yeah, so you want to just make sure when you're fishing, you can set yourself up for success. That's like the thing. Like I don't want to go fish when I know I'm not going to catch anything, even though this happens. Sorry, my throat's getting dry here. So I know that I want to fish where the wow, that was almost bad. There's so much pollen in the air right now. My contacts are drying out. Everything's like dry. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say is when you try to figure out, when you can figure out the golden conditions for your area, and I'm talking about miles of coastline. You can figure out miles of coastline, and as I always say, don't drive any more than 25 minutes away from your area because there's no point. Unless you have to like drive, unless you're like live inland and you have to drive to the coast, then it matters much less. But it's a lot easier when you live a few minutes away from the coast to be able to say, I don't want to fish any further than an hour or half an hour away because an hour is a long way. I could fish pretty much in an hour. I get pretty much almost drive down to the Cape and almost drive up to Maine on Cape Ann. And I kind of be equally distant apart from that. So I can fish both of those areas. That's so much coastline. I couldn't even comprehend how much coastline that is and how much it varies. How much it's so rocky, up in Maine, and it's so sandy and flat and everything on the Cape. So there's so much different change between that. That would be too much for me. That's why I like fishing on Cape Ann, because we're lucky enough to have pretty much every single shore fishing condition. We have rivers. We have 2 rivers. We have estuaries. We have sandy beaches. We have rocks. So we're so fortunate to have all of these different places, and every single one of these places, people catch giant fish from. It's kind of like its own. I mean, I guess everywhere that's the case. There's a lot of different places that have a lot of different conditions, but there's a lot of different places that have a sneaky amount of big fish. It's just the amount of effort that you put in to fishing for them. And effort can come in many different ways. It can come in just sheer time. I know people that just they out time it. They just fish so long, and they have their they have their lure in the water for such a long period of time that they can. It's just numbers. It's a number game. At that point, it's like the bass have to move through this area. When are they going to move through this area, and my lure is going to be there? You can cut hours of your life out, though, if you have a log, because then you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours fishing, even though that's much more fun than spending hours and hours, writing in a log. It's just that you'll spend way more time of your hours and hours fishing, actually catching fish and catching giant fish versus just being there to be there, And pretty much everybody that's listening here wants to be able to catch bass either consistently or catch bigger fish. And this is the one thing that you can control, and that is the amount of effort that you put into it. And everything else you can't. You can't control the fish, you can't control the condition, the weather, you can't control any of that. So that's all out of your hands. So what can you do personally? And that is, keeping a good log, and then being smart about when you're fishing, because then you can fish whenever. Like I don't like say I'm fishing every night. Like sometimes I want to go out in the middle of the day, 12 o'clock, and go fish. But when I go out and fish at 12 o'clock, I know it's not going to be like crazy fishing. It might be, but it's probably not going to be. But when I do go out fishing, I know I'm like, okay, I'm probably not going to catch a 20-pound bass. It's possible. I've done it before, done it many times. Caught my biggest fish at 12 o'clock, and it was 90 degrees out, not a cloud in the sky. But at the same time, I've had way more days where I go and I'm working hard to catch a schoolie. So when I am going to go during the day, in the middle of the day, I put myself in a spot with the correct conditions where I know that I'm going to catch a fish. And that's like, for sure, I'm going to catch not a big fish, but for sure I'm going to catch fish. And that has to do with tide, time, a day, like time of, it really has to do with tide. What tide is it? And that's important to be able to have a spot that's in every single tide. That's also very key. That's something that I would do first. I'd try to figure out, like, doesn't matter really the conditions of wind direction and everything. I would say have a spot that you can fish and you can catch fish from at low tide and at high tide, and sometime in the middle on either side of it. And hopefully that's hopefully you can do that, and hopefully you can drive to a spot in your area to do that. It's sometimes a lot harder when you live on, right? If you live on Long Island, I don't know anything really about that. I shouldn't really go there because I don't know anything about it. But say you lived on something that was like a big sandy beach, but it was like miles and miles and miles of the same structure. So it almost always fishes the same, but not really. There's always going to be spots that fish differently. So I guess it doesn't really, it's easier for some people. They don't have to drive as far. It's easier for some people like me that have almost all the conditions that you can fish from shore on Cape Ann. And I don't know what condition we don't have. That's why I'm saying almost, but I'm still leaving that up because really we have rivers, we have estuaries, we have we have flats, we have sandy beaches, we have like everything. Really, we do. We have huge rocks, and I'm talking about, it's not even that. We have all those different conditions. We have beaches that have like deep troughs, like right off the beach, like Sandy Beach. Then we have beaches that are super flat. We have all sorts of, like, we have pretty much everything. And that's why it's such a crazy place to fish, and there's so much to it that I just haven't explored yet. So I'm super excited that I guess I'm fairly new to it as far as like new to other areas. So I'm really excited to be able to explore so much more of it. I think that's something that a lot of people are hoping they can do. I feel like I've explained it a little bit in this podcast, and I hope this helps some people. And I was trying to be a little bit more, myself this podcast, so hopefully you were able to understand that. I'm so, like, when it comes to this, I'm just so passionate about it, and I have a million things. My mind's going at a million miles an hour, and I'm talking at a million miles an hour, and that's my problem, is that I talk extremely quick, and I talk over myself a lot of the time. So I'm trying to get better at this, talking to the camera. One thing that like happens to me is like I'm doing like the narration for the trailer, the Striped Bass Hunt Show trailer, and I have to like I can't like say it correctly, and I had to like redo it multiple times. I said it correctly off camera, but as soon as that camera and that recording, not the camera, but as soon as we're recording the sound, like I have such a hard time like being able to talk to the camera. So I'm trying my best to get better at talking to the camera. And the thing is, it's like I do catch big fish. I've done well at that, and not a lot of people that are like savvy with technology will like do shows and do podcasts and stuff. And when I'm trying to fish, the biggest thing for me is having someone that out there that is either in my area or just knowledgeable about fishing talk. And even if they're less knowledgeable than me, that still like being able to listen to someone's different opinion about things always helps. And I've gone to seminars and I've listened to seminars where I don't agree. I almost don't agree with everything the person is saying, even though they do have something. And there's always something. And I always talk about this in every article. You can have articles that you just disagree with in fishing completely. It's all preference, because the fish are the fish, and then pretty much every way that you fish, every way that everyone fishes, could work in some form. It might not be the way I would fish and the way I like fishing, but there are different things. Like, there's guys that are extremely good at catching fish on bucktails. I'm not a huge fan of bucktails. I do fish them in the spring when the conditions are wavy, and I do fish them in the fall when the conditions are wavy. I don't fish them a lot in the summer, but if I can get away with not using a jig, I'm not going to use a jig. I'm using, or soft plastic for that matter. I'll more readily pick up a soft plastic than I will a bucktail, but I still don't rarely throw soft plastics. I'm always throwing wooden plugs when I fish, or like eels, and that's pretty much it. That's all I do. But the cool thing about plugs is you can really catch. There's so many different styles of plugs that you can fish every single, water depth, and anything. You can fish any bait, anything. Like, the people, if you think of it, somebody's created something for it. And so I hope that, I can keep progressing, and I can keep progressing not only in the show and in the podcast. I can also, as a fisherman, and hopefully you guys can watch me do this, because there's a lot to go. Like, this is going to get crazy in the next few weeks. I think what's going to happen is, and I'm going to call this now, the show is going to do really well. I have a very good feeling about the show, and we're fortunate enough this year to have everything the way it is. Unfortunately, the unfortunate conditions as far as the coronavirus have actually opened some doors for me. So I am going to have the ability to, and it's also shut a lot of doors, but it's also opened a few that are pretty unique and crazy. But I have now way more time because I'm not in school. So now I can fish from the beginning of fall, like the beginning of spring, all the way through the spring, whenever I want, no matter what time of day it is. So, because I can always do my schoolwork at any time of the day. It's not like direct, like I need to do work. So that helps me a lot. And then having my siblings home, my camera guy around, I can do so many different things. And so the season's not going to be the way I thought it was going to be, but I think it's going to be very cool. And also, I think the fishing is going to be good this year. I've heard there's a lot of bunker around. I know people in Rhode Island are catching bass at a pretty steady rate right now. I'm not sure if they're on the Cape yet. I need to hear. I've heard whispers, but I still don't fully know. So I need to figure that out. And when I do, I will. If I have a podcast, I'll tell you. But I'm going to go to the Cape at the end, maybe at the end of next week. Maybe I'm looking for the On the Water magazine report, because that's going to show me for sure where they are, because they have all sorts of. They ask way more people than me. But they're always a few days behind. If I had to guess, they're going to be Rhode Island, and then they're going to be just about on the Cape. And when they say they're just about on the Cape, they're actually on the Cape a pretty decent amount, because we were getting fish on Cape Ann way, way before they actually said we had schoolies on Cape Ann. They said, oh, they're into Boston, South Boston, but they're fully on to Cape Ann by that point. So I know that by the 22nd, I'm hoping we'll get that week of the 22nd. I'm hoping, because it's a new moon, the bass will be migrating faster. I'll be able to start catching my first fish. And by then, I mean, really, the people in Maine, I feel bad for you guys, because you have probably almost a month before you're going to be getting fish in Maine, which sucks, because, that's tough, because, like, I'm itching to catch fish right now, and I can't imagine having to wait another month while I watch on social media everybody else catching fish. It's killing me. And not only that, some guys are getting some legitimately large fish. Yeah, I mean, the guys in New York, oh my gosh. I mean, those migratory big females that are coming out of either the Hudson or coming from the Chesapeake, they're catching some absolute cows, like 30, 40-pound bass. It's been sick. And so hopefully they get here in the next, I'm probably calling, I want to get my first 20-pound bass in end of May, early June, like first week of June. If I can't get one the first week of June, I'm gonna be sad. But I'm gonna try to get them really early in June. That I don't. It's the June new moon. The June new moon is one of my like. That's when you can get, in my opinion, that's like number one for us on Cape Ann. Like that's the first shot you have at getting a fish that could be 50 pounds. Like if you're gonna go tackle a 50-pound bass, there's other new moons that work great, but that new moon in June, that's the same as the new moon in October. You know, that's the time if you're gonna get onto a huge fish, because you have still the bait migrating and the concentration of large fish. Because if you think about it, everybody down in Maine, they have to, or up in Maine, they have to have these big fish have to pass us first. So that means that there's going to be a lot of big fish that are moving through every area. So think about that. Try to see when those big fish are going to be setting up in your spot. And the thing is, you can see a lot of that on your fishing log. You have your fishing log. You can see when you have waves of larger fish moving through or waves of smaller fish moving through. And historically, that's around the same time every year that you'll have a very good bite. I had a very good bite in June. I had a very good bite in late July and August. And then I had a very good bite in late August. I had my best bite in late August. I got my biggest fish in late August. And so that's like, and then I had one of my best numbered days of bass in those 20 to 30 pound range. I had probably one day where I had maybe 18 to 20 bass over 30 pounds or 20 pounds, 20 to 30 pounds. I can't really think, I have to look back at my log, but I had one day like that was insane, where I had like in the teens, if not 20s of bass over 20 pounds in only like a 2 to 3 hour span of time. So it was not very long either. It was every single cast, and they're right at our feet the entire time. It's stuff you read about. Like that was, for me, like that was like one of my favorite moments of the season. And yeah, so anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. This was a fun one to make. I'm very bored. I'm gonna try to do some filming. I know I said I was gonna take a video of me pencil popping and like how to pencil pop. That is going to come out at some point. Again, I'm just trying to this might come out next week, but I'm trying to figure this out because number one, there's like not a lot of open areas for us to fish beach wise. So you kind of have to figure out like off the rocks, and then I have to get all suited up, and it's just like, it's a big deal. So I might do it when we're on the Cape. I might do that video. But just know that I'm going to do some tutorials, and they're coming. As well as if you want to see these Pumbaa plugs, Joe Dion from Pumbaa Plugs has come out with a whole bunch of like videos on his not his Instagram, but he does one video on his Instagram, but on his website, where you can buy his plugs, where it shows those plugs getting like worked in from a drone shot from above. So you'll be able to watch his pencils and Magnum walkers and stick shads or whatever he has on there. I'm not entirely sure every single plug that he's filmed, but you'll be able to go and see what those look like from above, and see exactly what the action are on those plugs, because that's the primary plug that I fish, because I work with him. So yeah. Anyway, so thank you guys for watching this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it, watching or listening, and I will see you next time.